They never thought they were better than anybody. They were just people. They were just Janesville, Wisconsin.
They met in high school. They grew up in the same town, and somehow they started dating senior year and stayed together through college. My mom studied elementary education and became a teacher, and my dad studied, I believe he started in pre-med. Then he transferred into engineering and immediately flunked out. His dad wouldn't let him come home. Said, you know, if you flunked out, you're going to have to stay there and pay your own way. So he had to get a job. And he got a job in a clothing store. And the man who owned the clothing store really took him under his wing and taught him about business. And so when he got back into the University of Wisconsin, he ended up graduating with a business degree. They got married in June. My dad went into the Army, and my mom taught school. The one place I know they served that they talked about all the time was Fort Dix. They lived in married housing.
He was an MP, and they guarded James Meredith. So James Meredith was the first African American to go through Old Miss.
Because he was African American, there were riots, and they didn't want him to come there. So the U.S. Army was tasked with protecting him.
The president declared a state of emergency and sent in the military. Probably my guess is it was his first leadership experience. His world was about making sure she was happy. She brought things to him that he didn't have, absolutely. And he did things that he wouldn't have done. Or that he wouldn't have been as conscious about had she not been there. She also was a total perfectionist. He was obsessive. I think she was a huge part of the thoughtfulness and values and motivation that went into the foundation in her own way with him. Everything was to keep her happy, really, seriously. They were like that. And it was not perfect in any way. They were pretty codependent, but it was a love story. I mean, they were always together, especially after he retired, and very dependent on each other. And what I'm crying about is that, I don't know why this makes me cry, but they were visiting us in Alexandria, and Peter and I, my parents went out for dinner. And they were staying in a hotel in Old Town. And so Peter went to get the car to pick me up. And my parents and I were standing there and said goodbye, and they were walking back to the hotel. And he came to get me, and he said, you know, Kathy, when I drove by your parents on the way to get you, and they were holding hands. I don't know why that touches me, but it touched him. You know, 50 years into marriage, and they're still holding hands walking down the street. That's the best way to describe it. They were totally, it was a love story. My father started as a salesman, you know, so they didn't have a lot of money.
For American Hospital Supply in Richmond, Virginia, as a salesperson selling medical supplies to doctors' offices.
They moved a lot when we were little. He traveled a lot. He worked his way up, and he became president of one of the divisions of American Hospital Supply. My mom worked at Northwestern University. She volunteered as the advisor for her sorority. That really went on until our
Junior year in high school was when things changed for our family. My sister and I came home from school one day. I said, "Oh, what are you doing home? You get fired or something?" And he said, very seriously, "Why don't you two go upstairs and your mother and I will call you when we want to talk?" There had been a discussion with his boss about the fact that his boss was what appears to be now being demoted into his position. And so he was going to need to move down into the vice president spot. And that he had said, "Well, I'm not interested at this point in my career in moving backwards." So it was 9 months before he found another job. Eventually, he took a job at Patterson Dental Supply at the time.
And so then he had this opportunity to run Patterson in Minneapolis, knowing that it really needed to revamp and that there may be opportunity to take it further, to really sort of be his own man, or to really be a leader.
I believe he started the job right when we started our senior year in high school. They were owned by Beatrice Foods. So he was working there, and Beatrice was spinning off the company, and he and his management team decided to go for it. They talked to banks and wanted to do a leveraged buyout. Ultimately, it went through. A year or two into that, I remember conversations between my parents with my dad saying, everything they're trying isn't working and they can't seem to turn this around. I remember feeling that there was a sense of desperation. But they must have still been trying things, because they were trying to buy companies to increase the size of the business. I do remember talk about a company called Saslo that they were excited about. Once they bought that company, everything changed. And from that point, they started earning money, they started buying more companies. To me, that was the beginning of the period in the 90s of huge growth. They went public in 1992, so it was sort of a whirlwind. When they took the company public, they created an ESOP, Employee Stock Ownership Program, so that is when employees became owners of the company. That's really when he became sort of the hero to the people who worked there. Later, they started the Patterson Foundation that allowed for scholarships for employees' kids to go to college, and in those years, the stock just climbed. But a lot of people that I worked with had no idea what my dad was doing. If I checked the stock market in the newspaper, I had a woman consultant who was very senior say to me, "Oh, how cute, are you checking your penny stocks?"
Our parents were intentional about their giving. They were about everything they did around philanthropy.
Gratitude. They were very, very grateful people. They saw their financial success in life as a blessing. They were really humble. And the last thing in the world they ever were was judgmental of people of little to no means in terms of why that was true. They just simply wanted to do something that might help them. The legacy is to give gratefully and generously and graciously.
They really felt that that giving gave them purpose and meaning in life, and that they got a lot back from others because they gave.
And Pete and Pat would talk about, we are so lucky. We got married at the Holiday Inn in Janesville, Wisconsin, with the sign saying, "Congratulations, Pat and Pete," and left in a borrowed car. And how did they get to where they were? And they just wanted to share that luck with others in a way that I've really never seen in anyone else.
They're true patriots. We have rights, we know that. What the Freshettes have enabled us to do is to share the responsibilities that we have with each other and to each other. in ways that I think people forget. We're just a little too angry, a little too noisy, a little too unkind to each other these days. And I don't think anybody sees that as a positive way forward. And what the Teacher Institute, what the Frichettes have enabled us to do, is to be able to tell a different story of a better America, and to hopefully reconnect us to that so that we can go forward.
Pete and Pat were having dinner at our house, and after a certain amount of wine, and at about 11:30 at night, Pat turned to Pete and said, "Pete, this philanthropy stuff is really fun." And indeed, that reflected exactly how they felt about philanthropy. They I think, enjoyed the cause, they enjoyed the giving, but they wanted to participate. They wanted to be part of the experience. It wasn't just a matter of writing a check.
The Frichettes' philanthropy here in the Vail Valley is enormous in every aspect. I can't even think of very many nonprofits here that it hasn't touched. They had a broad reach in what their interests were, because at the end of the day, their interests were in making their communities better. Seldom, if ever, was there a difference of opinion between what Pete wanted to do and what Pat wanted to do. And if there was, well, usually Pat won. Pat would she giggled. She was a giggler, which I just love that.
Pete had that famous phrase, I'm sure you heard it, money is like manure. All you gotta do is spread it around and put a little light on it and a little water and something will grow.
A lot of people start foundations for tax purposes, but it was also about family. It was a family foundation.
The foundation for me was sort of scary in the beginning, because I felt this expectation that I would have to show up to meetings with places to give money away to, and I didn't know how to do that, how to find those. At a certain point, he would say to us, if you don't want to do this, we can dissolve this foundation, we can give the money away. I need to know that everybody wants to be on board. And I think that Kathy and I sort of were like, we said we want to do this, but we need help. What are we supposed to be doing?
It was unifying, and we'd have a whole weekend and we would get together and we'd talk about the mission.
Of course, the foundation has grown significantly in funding. Over time, we're doing education with the next generation, who will hopefully choose to come on to the board eventually when they're ready. And we hired Pat Perrell several years ago now for education. And that was a big turning point for us. Once Pat came in, I think we became much more focused on where we all wanted to go.
They had a few goals in setting up the Family Foundation, and they wanted their family to learn that. So their hope was that the family members would get involved in philanthropy, would get involved in organizations, and give to organizations they were involved in, and find that giving purpose. So that was a huge reason.
And I remember early on, in our first meetings, talking about how this was about getting family together. They didn't want it to just be about check writing. That their personal involvement in some of these organizations that we were giving to was really important.
A second reason was that they really hoped that this would be a way for the family to bond, to continue to gather, and to stay together, quite frankly. And both of those were key motivators.
So the Family Foundation started with my parents, my sister, myself, and my brother-in-law. And it has only grown that my husband, he became a part of the board.
Then it was about teaching us how to be philanthropic, teaching the next generation. Let's see how the kids respond. Let's see if they get involved. Let's see if the grandkids are interested.
Pete used to say that money had three roles. One was that it was a scorekeeper. The second is that it was something that, how do you say this? It was a labor saver. You know, in other words, if you had money, you could hire people to do things that you didn't have to do yourself. And then the third was that it was something to share, to give away, and to nurture things that you were interested or cared about. And so they really saw the foundation as a way to perpetuate that within their family. When the foundation started, it was, Pete and Pat put $2 million worth of Patterson stock into it. By the time I started working with them, they had added an additional approximately $8 million, so the foundation was about $10 million. So a $10 million foundation means they would give away about $500,000 a year. And then about 4 years ago, as part of a strategic planning process, Pete and Pat added an additional $10 million into the foundation. So it was sitting at about $23 million. So the foundation was giving about $1 million a year away. Now with Pete and Pat's passing, the foundation will receive close to $200 million from their estates. So the foundation will be at about $200 million when the assets from their estates are distributed into the foundation. So foundation giving will go from $1 million a year to $10 million a year.
I hope that it remains a gift and an opportunity. I mean, our kids have an amazing opportunity that many don't. An opportunity to learn about other people that they would never learn about. Obviously to give and to make a difference in the world and to think beyond themselves. And I hope that that continues.
Pete and Pat have indicated that their hope is that it goes on into perpetuity, but if the family finds it a burden or it is not something that the family sees as a fit for them, in the long run, the family is able to distribute the charitable dollars out into the community in a shorter time frame. If you think long-term, is really to continue to create the environment for the foundation to be what Pete and Pat hoped it to be. And they hoped it to be a place for their family to gather and to do good.
It was never about money. It was never about things. Pay it forward. Oh, you're not that important. That's huge. So, you know, some people, I earned it. You know, no. You received it. And now you need to do the right thing with it. You know, to those much has been given, much is required. And not only that, but you are going to be happier in life if that's the way you look at your fortune, your good fortune. You're going to be much happier in life if you look at it as a gift to give and to pass forward.
Their legacy, I would say, is definitely paying back, but I would say a big part of their legacy is having fun, and that was always so important to them. And my mom especially always said, just have fun, stop thinking about it so much.
Pete and Pat were joyful souls who cared about others and who are up there cheering you on whatever you're doing in your life.